Breaking news from Washington and Kiev: tensions explode, alliances shatter, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This is your sizzling update for March 1st, 2025, and we're diving straight into the chaos rocking the Oval Office and the war-ravaged streets of Ukraine. Buckle up, this is jaw-dropping. Imagine this: Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky storms into the White House for a high-stakes showdown with President Donald Trump. It's supposed to be a united front against Russia's relentless war machine, but it erupts into a shouting match that's left the world stunned. Sources say Trump and Zelensky clashed fiercely, with Vice President J.D. Vance jumping in, accusing Ukraine of disrespecting America. Trump reportedly told Zelensky to come back when he's ready for peace, and then canceled a joint press conference in a rage. The room was so tense you could cut it with a knife, but it gets crazier. Zelensky fired back, warning that Ukraine's very survival hinges on Trump's support. 3 years into this brutal war, over 400 days of bombs, blood, and defiance, Zelensky's betting it all on America's might. Ukrainian novelist Andrei Kurkov, the voice of a battered nation, puts it bluntly: this isn't just a war, it's a fight for survival against Putin's stranglehold. And now, Trump's wavering has Kiev holding its breath. Cut to the streets of Ukraine, people are reeling. Locals told CNN they're shocked but not surprised by Trump's hardball tactics. One Ukrainian snapped, "We're dying here, does he get that?" Another begged America not to abandon them mid-fight. The mood? Desperation mixed with defiance, as Russia's shadow looms larger by the day. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Republicans are split down the middle. Some cheer Trump's tough stance: no more blank checks for Ukraine, they shout. Others warn he's handing Putin a victory on a silver platter. Data's flying, polls show GOP voters souring on the war, but Zelensky's plea cuts deep: without U.S. firepower, we're toast. And just yesterday, he doubled down in Europe, huddling with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to scrape together any lifeline he can get. So where does this leave us? A superpower showdown spiraling out of control, a war-weary nation hanging by a thread, and a Trump-Zelensky feud igniting global tensions. Is this the end of America's stand with Ukraine, or just the start of a bigger, uglier fight? Stay tuned, this powder keg's about to blow. Now, let's analyze why this rift between Trump and Zelensky happened. Join me as we break it down. Conflict at the White House meeting, February 28, 2025, the meeting between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office on February 28, 2025, became the epicenter of their fallout. Reports say the atmosphere grew tense fast when Trump demanded Zelensky show gratitude for past U.S. support, threatening to pull all aid if Ukraine didn't agree to America's proposed peace terms. Zelensky, in contrast, insisted he needed Trump's backing to protect Ukraine's territory and refused to bow to Russia. The disagreement escalated to the point where Trump told Zelensky to leave the White House and scrap their joint press conference. Marking a dangerous turn in their relationship, differing views on peace and Ukraine's role. Trump seems intent on pushing a quick peace deal with Russia, even sidelining Ukraine from initial talks, like the US-Russia meeting in Saudi Arabia with no Ukrainian presence. Zelensky saw this as an attempt to push Ukraine aside and resisted fiercely, arguing that any solution must involve Ukraine to be sustainable. Trump, meanwhile, doubted Zelensky's commitment to peace, accusing him of unwillingness to negotiate if the U.S. was involved, a sentiment echoed in Trump's post-meeting Truth Social rant. Tensions over aid and economic interests. Trump has repeatedly stressed that the U.S. needs to recoup the massive aid, estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars, poured into Ukraine over 3 years. He suggested Ukraine hand over mineral resource rights, like rare earths, to the U.S. as compensation. Zelensky initially rejected this, calling it pressure that would saddle Ukraine with debt for 10 generations, though they later reached a milder agreement on February 25, 2025. Still, frustration over Trump's handling of aid, including pausing new military support, widened the gap between the two leaders. Personal attacks. Trump escalated tensions by labeling Zelensky a dictator for not holding elections during wartime and accusing him of exploiting the U.S. These remarks didn't just damage their personal rapport, they reflected Trump's strategic shift, from supporting Ukraine against Russia under U.S. public pressure to adopting a hardline stance prioritizing America's economic and domestic political interests over maintaining the alliance with Kyiv, and so, Ukraine lost faith in the US and turned to the UK for help. After the disastrous meeting with Trump and threats to cut aid, Ukraine realized it could no longer rely on the US as it had under previous administrations. Reports show Trump offloaded primary responsibility to Europe, particularly the EU and NATO, to support Ukraine. This forced Zelensky to seek help from other allies, with the UK emerging as a viable option due to its strong anti-Russia stance and consistent military aid in the past. Summit with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, March 2, 2025. Zelensky met UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer on March 2, 2025, in London to discuss support for Ukraine as the war with Russia entered a tense phase. Held right after the Trump fiasco. This meeting underscored Zelensky's push to bolster ties with European nations, especially the UK, which has a history of providing long-range weapons and financial aid to Ukraine. Zelensky stressed that British support was essential to counter Russian pressure, particularly as the US stepped back from its leadership role. Ukraine's dire situation, with Russia gaining ground on the battlefield and US aid in jeopardy, Ukraine faces an emergency. Sources suggest Kyiv can only hold out until mid-2025 without significant external support. Turning to the UK isn't just about securing military aid, it's an effort to build a unified European front to fill the void left by the US. The rift between Trump and Zelensky stems from clashing strategic interests, disagreements over peace approaches, and economic pressure Trump placed on Ukraine. The February 28, 2025, meeting was the breaking point, pushing Ukraine to seek rescue from the UK and other European allies. This development not only shakes the US-Ukraine alliance but signals a major shift in global geopolitics, with Europe forced to shoulder more responsibility in supporting Ukraine against Russia. The relationship between Trump and Zelensky has become tense following a public confrontation at the White House on February 28, 2025, when Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance sharply criticized Zelensky, even demanding that he leave the White House without signing an agreement on rare mineral resources. Trump accused Zelensky of being ungrateful and gambling with World War III, while Zelensky firmly demanded security guarantees from the US rather than just a ceasefire with Russia. Trump may continue to pressure Zelensky to concede in negotiations with Russia, using the leverage of cutting or suspending US military aid to Ukraine. On February 28, 2025, Trump declared his desire for an immediate ceasefire and threatened to withdraw support if Ukraine did not agree to peace talks on his terms. If Zelensky does not yield, Trump could follow through on this threat, severely undermining Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Russia. However, Zelensky has shown resilience and received strong support from Europe, e.g., a $2.8 billion loan from the UK on March 1, 2025. This could force Trump to reconsider, as a completely abandoned Ukraine would damage the US's international credibility and push Ukraine closer to Europe. If Trump stubbornly washes his hands of Ukraine, US-Ukraine relations could collapse entirely, leading Zelensky to seek stronger alliances with NATO countries like the UK, Germany, and France. This would heighten tensions within NATO, potentially pitting the US and Europe against each other over Ukraine policy. Trump might attempt to mend ties by sending a neutral envoy, as suggested by expert Eric Ciaramella, but given his impulsive nature, this seems unlikely unless Zelensky concessions first. The Trump-Zelensky conflict has divided European responses. Some leaders, such as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Germany's incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz, quickly expressed support for Zelensky, while Hungary under Viktor Orban praised Trump. This highlights a potential fracture in the Western alliance. Europe is under pressure to bolster support for Ukraine to fill the gap if the US pulls back. The meeting of European leaders in London on March 2, 2025, hosted by Starmer, will be a first step towards solidifying this unity. However, Europe's ability to shoulder Ukraine's full military aid burden alone is limited due to insufficient financial and military resources compared to the US. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has emphasized the importance of joint cooperation. Macron and Starmer might continue using flattery to pull Trump back in, but if that fails, Europe could shift toward a stronger strategic autonomy policy, reducing reliance on the US. Although there is no specific evidence of a direct threat from Trump targeting the UK in current data, we can infer from the context that Trump may have hinted at economic penalties, e.g., tariffs, or reduced military cooperation if the UK does not align with his stance on Ukraine. During his meeting with Starmer on February 27, 2025, Trump was friendly and agreed to consider a trade deal, but after the Zelensky incident, his attitude may shift. If the UK continues to openly support Ukraine, e.g. with the newly signed $2.8 billion loan, Trump might view this as defiance and retaliate by threatening the special relationship privileges, such as imposing tariffs on British goods or pulling support on other international issues. The idea of Trump's downfall, if US-Ukraine relations collapse, must be considered in the context of US domestic politics and international dynamics. Trump abandoning Ukraine could divide the Republican Party. Figures like Senator Lindsey Graham, a former Ukraine supporter, have criticized Zelensky, but many voters and lawmakers still see Russia as a threat. If Trump is perceived as selling out Ukraine to Putin, he could lose support from hawks and moderates in his party, weakening his political standing. However, with his deal-making style and loyal base, Trump could spin the narrative by claiming he's putting America first and avoiding a costly war. If the US withdraws from Ukraine, Trump's and America's international credibility would suffer greatly. NATO allies like the UK, Germany, and France might lose faith in US leadership, accelerating Europe's pursuit of strategic independence. This wouldn't necessarily be a personal downfall for Trump, but it would diminish US geopolitical influence under his tenure. Russia would gain a major strategic victory without significant concessions, bolstering Putin's position. Trump is unlikely to collapse entirely just because US-Ukraine ties break down, as he can control the domestic narrative through media and his MAGA base's loyalty. However, he would face mounting international pressure and the risk of isolation within the Western Bloc, especially if Europe unites against his policies. A more extreme scenario is that if Ukraine falls to Russia due to a lack of US support, Trump could be blamed for a humanitarian and geopolitical disaster, akin to how Biden was criticized for the Afghanistan withdrawal. Trump-Zelensky, this relationship could worsen unless one side gives in, but with Europe's backing, Zelensky is likely to hold firm, forcing Trump to weigh maintaining international credibility against following through on his threat to cut aid. Europe will try to fill the void if the US pulls out, but tensions with Trump will rise, especially with the UK if Trump retaliates with economic or military measures over London's pro-Ukraine stance. Threat to the UK, this could manifest as tariffs or reduced cooperation, but the UK will likely prioritize its European alliances over yielding to Trump. Trump's downfall, it's not guaranteed to happen directly, but he would suffer a major credibility hit if Ukraine fails and Europe turns away, though his domestic resilience remains strong thanks to his loyal base.